A train sat stopped in the dark on a lonely stretch of Missouri track, and four masked men were walking down the aisle with guns out, taking everything the passengers had and getting ready to do worse. A mother was hiding her daughter's face against her coat. An old man had already been struck down for being slow with his watch. And then, from the back of the car, one passenger none of them had paid any mind to stood up out of his seat, a quiet man in a dark coat, and said 6 words that stopped the whole robbery cold. This is the story of the night the most wanted outlaw in America bought a train ticket like anybody else, and what he did when the shooting was supposed to start. Missouri, the autumn of 1879. Stay with me, because nobody on that train ever forgot his face, and not one of them ever gave it up. Here is the story. The train was the night express running east out of Sedalia. 11 cars, half of them full, rocking through the black Missouri countryside a little after 10 o'clock. In the third passenger car rode the people this story is about. A widow named Mrs. Hale and her young daughter, going east to family after a hard year. A drummer, a traveling salesman with his sample case. A young married couple, the Deans, barely a month wed. An old man named Pettibone with a gold watch his sons had given him. A railway clerk, a preacher. Ordinary people, dozing or watching the dark go by, the way people do on a night train, none of them dreaming the night was about to come apart. Wherever you're watching from, drop it in the comments. I'd like to know how far this one travels. Up ahead, where the track ran through a dark wooded cut, somebody had piled crosties across the rails. The engineer caught the lantern signal too late, threw the brakes, and the whole express ground to a screaming, shuddering, sparking halt in the middle of nowhere. Trunks and passengers thrown forward in the dark. And before the cars had even stopped rocking on their springs, men were swarming up out of the black tree line on both sides, 4 of them climbing into the passenger cars, more running up toward the express car where the safe and the strongbox rode. They wore flour sack masks with the eye holes torn ragged, and they came through the doors already firing into the ceilings to make their point. And the point was made. Women screamed and men froze. Now, this was not Jesse James's outfit, whatever the papers would try to pin on him later. This was a crew run by a cold hard case named Cole Renfro, and Renfro's men had earned a reputation the James gang never had and never wanted. They hurt people. They had killed before, on jobs that never should have needed a killing at all, because Cole Renfro held to the belief that a frightened country was an obedient one, and that a body left on the floor now and again was simply good for future business. They came down the aisle of the third car with sacks held open, watches, rings, money in the bag. Anything you hold back, we find it, and we shoot you for it. The drummer gave up his billfold with shaking hands. The young husband, Dean, put his wife's wedding ring in the sack, and then his own, his jaw working. And old Pettibone was slow, his fingers were stiff, and the watch chain caught, and one of Renfro's men cracked him across the head with a pistol barrel and put him down bleeding between the seats, and the man laughed while he did it. Mrs. Hale pulled her daughter's face into her coat so the child would not see, and prayed they would not look too closely at a widow and a little girl. At the back of the car, in the last seat, a man had been sitting quiet the whole time with his hat tipped down like he was sleeping. He was not sleeping, he was a passenger. He had bought a ticket in Sedalia, like everybody else, under a name that was not his, because he had business east and the railroads were watched, and a man traveling as an ordinary passenger drew less notice than a man on a hard-ridden horse. He had been minding his own business, wanting nothing more than to ride quiet to his stop, and he had watched the whole thing come down the aisle toward him, the guns, the sacks, the old man clubbed to the floor, the child's face hidden, and something in him had reached its limit. He stood up out of his seat. He did not draw, did not shout, did not do any of the things a frightened man does. He just stood, slow and easy, his hands loose and open at his sides, the way a man stands when he has been in 100 rooms with guns in them and learned that the calm man is the dangerous one. The nearest masked robber swung a revolver around onto him and told him to sit back down. And the quiet man looked at him, unhurried, and said the 6 words that every passenger in that car would repeat for the rest of their lives. "You're robbing the wrong train, son." The masked man laughed and told him to sit down and empty his pockets before he got himself killed. The quiet man did not sit down. "I know your boss," he said, loud enough to carry up the car. "Cole Renfro. I know the cut he runs, and I know how he runs it, and I know he's got maybe 4 men in these cars and 3 more at the express, and I know not one of you has thought about what happens if even one passenger in here is armed and isn't afraid of you." He let that sit. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, "and I'm armed." There is a particular silence that falls when men who deal in fear suddenly meet someone who has none. The whole car felt it. The masked man's gun had drifted, just slightly, off the quiet man and toward the floor, the way a gun does when the man holding it is recalculating. "Who in the hell are you?" the masked man said. And the quiet man told him, quietly, just for him, leaning in so the passengers could not hear the name. And whatever the name was, the masked man went still as stone, and the blood went out of his face above the flour sack mask, and his gun came the rest of the way down. Because here was the thing Cole Renfro's men knew that the passengers did not. There were men in Missouri whose names you did not want to hear on the wrong end of a stopped train. Men whose reputations were currency among the outlaw crews, who had friends and kin in every hard camp in the state, and who could make a man's life very short if that man harmed them or theirs. The quiet man at the back of the 3rd car had just spoken one of those names, low, into a robber's ear, and the robber believed it, because you do not joke about a name like that, and because the man had said it the way only the genuine article ever says it. "We didn't know," the masked man started. "There's no way we could have." "No," the quiet man agreed. "You couldn't have. So here's how it goes. Renfro doesn't hear my name tonight. You tell him a passenger pulled a gun and it went bad. Tell him whatever lets you keep your pride. But everything in that sack goes back. The watch, the rings, the billfolds, the ladies' things, all of it, back into the hands it came out of. And you're going to pick that old man up off the floor and set him in his seat gentle, and one of you is going to be sorry to him out loud, and then you're going to get off my train, and you're going to take your tie pile off my track, and you're going to be 3 counties gone by sunup. Or I send word where I said I'd send it. You understand me?" The masked man understood him. "It is a strange thing to watch," the passengers said afterward, to watch 4 armed robbers who a minute before had owned the whole car suddenly moving fast and careful to undo what they had done. They went back down the aisle, seat by seat, emptying the sack out into their own hands and pressing watches and rings and folded money back into the laps and palms of the very people they had just robbed, and not one of them would meet a passenger's eyes while they did it. The drummer got his billfold, the young Deans got their wedding rings, and Mrs. Dean put hers back on her finger with both hands shaking. They lifted old Pettibone up off the floor, as careful as if he were their own grandfather, propped him gentle in his seat, pressed a folded handkerchief to the cut on his head, and one of them muttered that he was sorry, mister, real sorry, and meant it the way a man means anything with a gun at his back. And the widow Hale got her late husband's pocket watch back, the one thing in the world she had left of him that she had given up for lost not 2 minutes before, set gently back into her open hand. And then they were gone, off into the dark tree line, the whole crew of them, the crosties hauled off the rails, the lanterns scattering and winking out up the wooded cut. The engineer got the all clear, and within a few minutes the express was rolling again, east into the night, picking up speed, the wheels finding their rhythm on the rails as if nothing at all had happened. And 11 cars of passengers sat stunned in the swaying lamplight, with their stolen lives handed back into their hands, hardly able to believe a word of what they had just watched with their own eyes. They had been robbed, every one of them, and then unrobbed, inside of a quarter hour, by one quiet man at the back of the third car who had done nothing more than stand up out of his seat. They crowded around him, of course. They wanted to thank him, to shake his hand, to press him with questions, to know his name so they could tell it to everyone they ever met. The young husband, Dean, wanted to buy him whatever a man could buy on a train and shook his hand twice. The preacher wanted to lay a blessing on him. A child stared at him like he had stepped out of a storybook, and the quiet man bore all of it patiently. He crouched down and checked old Pettibone's head with surprising gentleness and told him it would mend, that he'd had worse himself. He told the widow Hale he was glad about the watch, and meant it. But when they pressed him for his name, so they could thank him properly, so they could tell the story right, he only tipped his hat back down over his eyes and said he was nobody worth telling about. Just a man who didn't care much for bullies. And they ought to all sit down now and catch their breath, he said, because it was a long way yet to the next stop, and the night was over. He got off at a small dark station a few stops on, before anyone could make a fuss at a lit platform, and he was gone into the night the way he had come. The passengers rode on east, and they talked of nothing else the rest of that journey. And most of them, in the years to come, would tell the story of the night their train was robbed and a quiet stranger stood up and gave it all back. Now here is the part that matters most, and the real reason this story has lasted at all. When the railroad detectives came asking, and they came hard, because a robbery stopped is still a robbery attempted, and the railroad wanted every face, every name, every scrap of detail. The passengers of the third car, every last one of them, came down with the very same strange forgetfulness. They could describe the 4 robbers down to the stitching on the flour sack masks, but the man who stopped it, funny thing, couldn't rightly recall his face. Ordinary-looking fellow, they said, dark coat, kept his hat low, didn't give any name, got off somewhere in the dark a few stops on, couldn't say just where. The widow Hale said it, the Deans said it, the preacher, who did not like to shade the truth, found he could live with this one. The drummer said it, even old Pettibone, with the railroad's own bandage still on his head, looked the detective in the eye and came up empty. Not one of them gave the law a single thing worth having. They had each decided, alone, without ever once speaking of it to each other, that whoever that man was, and whatever the law wanted him for, the law was not going to get him by their hand, not on account of the night he stood up and gave them back their watches and their lives. Within 3 years, the quiet man was dead, shot in the back of his own house for the reward on his name by someone who called him a friend. The papers ran the robberies and the killings, the trains he took, and the men who died, the long dark legend of him. They did not run the night express out of Sedalia, and a clubbed old man sat gently back in his seat, and a widow's watch pressed back into her hands, and a whole car full of people who looked a railroad detective in the eye and lied to protect the most wanted man in America, because there was no one to run it. The only people who knew had all agreed, without a word, to forget. His name was Jesse James. He had robbed trains himself. He never denied it, and some of the people he robbed surely had their own bad nights because of him. He was not a clean man, And this is not a clean story. But on one autumn night, on a stopped train in the Missouri dark, he was just a passenger who watched a child's face get hidden and an old man get clubbed down, and decided that whatever else his name was good for, it could be good for this. He stood up, he gave it all back, and a car full of strangers paid him the only way he'd have taken, by forgetting they ever saw him. One of those passengers, the Hale girl, the child whose face her mother hid, lived to be a very old woman, and late in her life she finally told the story to her grandchildren, the watch and the masks and the quiet man at the back of the car. And one of them asked her if it was really him, really the famous outlaw, and whether she was sorry her family had helped such a man go free. And the old woman thought about it a long while, and then she said, "I was 8 years old, and 4 men with guns were going to do God knows what to my mother and me. And one man stood up in a whole car full of grown men sitting frozen in their seats, just one. Whatever the papers called him, he was the one who stood up. I've never once been sorry I forgot his face." If this story reached you, do me a favor, pass it on, and subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more of these coming.